Okay, well, welcome to CEO Zones. We're the confidential sanctuary exclusively designed for enterprise-size chief executive officers, and we're here to help you have stress-tested major decisions and be that voice that your team and your board just can't give you. So with that, today we're honored to have as our guest Terry Boysen from Somerset West. I always say Cape Town, but we'll be a little bit more specific. Somerset West, South Africa. Today, our topic is around governance, compliance, or the competitive advantage. And I think all of my past clients would say it's got to be compliance, but if it's not a competitive advantage, you're losing the value that your board can give you. So I'm not sure where you might go with that, Terry, but welcome from South Africa. Please take over.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. Once again, always nice to be on your platform at CEO Zones. And this particular topic that we're doing today is the second of a three-part series. And this one, I think, has a better spin perhaps on it in the sense that I don't think many organizations have truly understood or appreciated, that compliance actually can be turned into something more strategic as a differentiator to the clients and obviously to the to the organization itself. So without any further ado, let's quickly hit a few slides. As you know, Bill, I'm not very in favor of slides, but I suppose they are part of the record and people like to look at these slides. But I think as we start this particular discussion, the problem I think with governance itself through the years, since it's been around, is that a lot of people frame it as something that is an overhead. It's a grudge. It's like that necessary evil that you've got to do, which is all part and parcel the cost of doing business, or at least staying in business. And that's kind of how it's been framed for many years. And with that, of course, is the legal fraternity and the compliance fraternity, where they kind of own that space of governance and the space of compliance, less so risk. We'll talk about the risk this now. And unfortunately, if we look at this acronym of governance, risk, and compliance, commonly known as GRC, especially the governance and the risk side of things, it's a discussion that you find permeates itself in the board, but only for a short period in the boardroom. And then when the board kind of get that green flag from maybe the company secretary or even the head of risk or the head of governance or compliance to say, well, we're compliant, then it feels like the board has got over the hurdle and says, right, now we're going to get on to business. Now it's going to be business as usual. And I think that's probably a good part to start this particular discussion, because if we go back to one of the earlier definitions, I think it was probably Sir Adrian Cadbury, I think it was, he said round about in 1984, 1987, thereabout, he described governance as a system by which we direct and control. And if this is a system by which we are directing and controlling, if that is the system that we use to ensure that an organization is doing well, that it's sustainable, isn't it ironic that we're not actually looking at the system differently? If it is the entire system, why aren't we looking at it differently, in the sense that we say, well, how do we get advantage from that system? The system generally tends to be burdensome. Oh gosh, it's that compliance thing again. And that's how we're looking at the system. If it is the system by which we direct and control, why are we not getting anything more out of it? Where's the bang for the buck? Where's the value? We're not seeing that. All right. And that's probably, you know, it's probably the kind of the starting point of where it goes wrong, because we've got it wrong in our heads. Maybe because somebody along the line said it's only reserved for a discussion in the boardroom. We don't see it as a system that actually sustains the entire organization. And so what happens is that the language that we've used, or the terminology that we've used, keeps on taking us back to this boogeyman, almost this bad thing, this thing that if you don't do it, you're going to get into trouble, you're going to go to jail, you're going to get a fine. And so that language perpetuates this scaremongering almost on the board. Now I'd like to just stop on that and maybe just talk a little bit about the scaremongering. Is that, let's face it, how many people actually enjoy going to a governance lecture, or even listening to one like this today? you, you've, you've got to be crazy. I think I said 2 weeks ago at the previous webinar, I said, I don't think I went looking for governance as a career. I think it came looking for me. Nobody in their right mind actually says, well, hey, guess what? I'm a governance guy, I'm a compliance guy. Whoopee, whoopee. So when you, I'm glad I cracked a joke there for you, Bill. That's as good as my jokes get. But when you look, when you look at the circumstances, it's like something has gone wrong. Wells Fargo, it doesn't matter who it is, Chase, man, it doesn't matter who it is. Whenever a name comes up, WorldCom, Enron, it was a governance issue. And it's always got this negative kind of feeling to it. And we have them in South Africa as well. And I really believe that we need to be looking at that system very differently. And the language needs to change. And so, yes, every one of these particular reasons, that we kind of say, well, we have to do it because it 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 it's law, it's compulsory. If you don't do it, something's going to happen. And then, of course, all the negativity kicks in. And the first thing someone will say, well, just go and tick it, just to make sure it's done. In the boardroom, you may even hear a board, and I have heard this on many, many occasions, where the board will turn around to the company secretary and will say to the secretary, just tell me we're compliant. And I don't think they even understand. And I'm being, I'm being cautious, perhaps. I'm being careful in saying, what do we mean by, are we compliant? Because compliant is not necessarily compliant only to a law, but compliant to so many other things that actually allows an organization to exist, to allow the organization to function. So we need to change this language. We need to change the mindset. And I remember, in years gone by, Judge Mervyn King describing governance as, two sides of the opposite part of a coin, risk on the one side and opportunity on the other of the same coin. And when you look at risk and opportunity as opposite sides of the same coin, then surely we should be evolving to a point where we're able to say, as a board, our duty, our function, okay, maybe not so much the duty, but the function, one of the functions, there are a number of them, of course, but one of the functions is actually to apply our mind to the appetite of risk, the tolerance of risk, both to the compliance areas of the business, that which you need to be compliant with, but also to look at the marketplace and look at how that market is changing and there are risks in the market. And so when I bring in the notion of compliance, it's not just complying to the internal instruments of an organization. Instruments could be, law, code, policy, procedure, delegations, charters, even the strategy is also an instrument. So it's the internal and the external instruments that we've got to be cognizant of in order to shape our thinking, our words, our terminology, so that we're all beginning to see it in a way that we concede there are risks. We have to concede there are risks. All businesses have risk. But we can't keep on putting a negative spin and be averse to the risk if we believe we're going to be successful as an organization. A board can't think like that. A board is there, and I know Ralph would talk a lot about this as well, one of your other content partners. A board is there to understand the environment, understand the risk, and then to decide at one point to another point, how far are you going to push that risk? And to what extent are you going to be compliant? Compliant not just to law, but to be compliant with all the instruments. And I purposely don't want to say or the legal instruments, because strategy is not a legal instrument. That's something different. Okay. So we need to apply our mind differently. The words, I think, are giving away the body language, if you will, the closed mentality, the closed mindset when we talk about this thing called compliance. Right. So with that being said, the question, I guess, is on all of our minds. Is governance a cost that you tolerate? Or is it an advantage that you can make use of, that you can deploy? It's a good question. I don't think most directors have really sat long and hard on that question. And certainly in my experience, we've never really, as directors, been asked to answer that question directly. And that's probably because governance is really presented as a choice. You have to govern. You
I
have to
guess
be
I would say to you, Terry, that
yeah,
every good CEO that I've worked with, they're asking that question
yeah,
quite frequently, even
yeah,
by
yeah,
individual on the board. But yeah,
yeah.
from the board looking at it, yes, I'll
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
absolutely. But let's look at the framing of this question, Bill. The question is not saying to you, am I presenting you with a choice of being compliant versus non-compliancy? That's not what the question is asking. What the question is asking is, are you actually getting something back? Is there some kind of return, if I can put it that way, a return on your investment for your governing, for your governance? What's the return? And it's not a number. Well, it actually is a number. I'll get to that just now, but it's not just expressed as, the return on investment, the bottom line. That's not the only number we look for nowadays, right? So this is a hard question. It it's a question that requires, in my mind, deep reflection. Where are you getting something back in return for your good governance? Right. And for me, that's a pivotal question. And the reason why we have webinars just like this. You see, here's part of the problem. As soon as an organization starts finding itself on the back foot and maybe profits are under pressure, that's when we really start testing the robustness of the governance of the organization. You can't test governance when times are good. Well, in fact, you can, but you shouldn't be testing governance when times are good. And so if we look to when an organization is on the back foot, the first thing that starts happening, actually we had a case like this week. I'm not going to mention the name of the organization in South Africa, but the fact of the matter is that when the organization is on the back foot, investors become impatient. Executives incentives disappear. And that's actually what happened this week with this one particular organization. The organization, the board said to the CEO, and I won't mention names, they said, listen, mate, no more bonuses for you personally and no more increases. He took it on the chin. He accepted it. So that's typically what happens when the governance of the organization, is rattled. Something has gone wrong. Profits fall. Investors start asking questions. Stakeholders start asking questions. And then, of course, what happens is that the expectations start to rise. They increase. Now, that is the moment of truth in my mind. Because if you say to me, Terry, I'm taking away your salary or bonus as a CEO, it could be as a manager, any manager. You've done very bad, Joe. So therefore, I'm going to dock pay or you're not going to get a bonus. That's the real point where we got to start focusing. I think last week, a week before, Bill, I spoke about, the visible thing that you see, a CEO resigning or a CEO being, docked with his pay or his bonus. But what's the invisible stuff that you're not seeing? What's behind the scenes? What are the processes that are taking place? And when these expectations start to increase because the organization is on the back foot or something has gone wrong, there's been a damage of any kind of sort, that's exactly when we start testing the governance, the compliance, and the risk of the organization. It's exactly at that point in time that we start testing it. So I come back to this question. In those times of difficulty, can you tell me truthfully, can you demonstrate that the governance that you've embedded in the organization is actually safeguarding you. It's providing safety rails. It's helping you to do a better job, to see things in the organization differently. And I think that's the real question that we need to be asking ourselves. Okay, so that's a little bit about that question. I thought it'd be useful to just spend a bit of time reflecting on that question, because it's not it's not are you compliant versus do you choose not to be compliant. That's not what the question is about. So where does compliance and governance fit? Well, the whole system is the governance, of which compliance is a part of that. So now we reflect, Bill, a little bit on this, the thing of the system. And there I can come back to the parts that you see that are visible and the parts that are not so visible. And so we know that governance is not, a static event. It's continuously changing. It's evolving. And therein lies, I think, a lot of things that we don't give enough attention to. I'm going to give you a bit of an analogy. Let's assume that I go onto a racing track, a motor vehicle, a motor car racing car on the track. If I don't have full visibility on the dashboards of that particular, F1, we'll call it an F1. If I don't have proper visibility, regardless of what's happening in the pit lanes, the mechanics, as good as what they are, as a racing car driver myself, if I don't have access to the instrumentation, I'm not going to win that race, and I'm probably going to blow the engine by not looking at the instrumentation. So when we talk about the system, I'm not just talking about the system on your dashboard. I'm not just talking about the mechanics in the workshop on the day of the race. That's not the system. The system is much more than that. The system is the hydraulics of the what you call it, taking off the nuts and bolts in a second, on less than a second, of the tires, and putting new tires on, new rim, new tires. That's all part of the system. The system is also the intercoms, everything to changing the vehicle's tires in seconds to get the racing car driver back onto the track, back into the race, and hopefully to win. That's the system I'm talking about. I think this is important because with the way modern agile organizations and their boards operate, they don't have time to look in the rearview mirror the whole time. They have to be concentrating going forward, and everything has got to work like clockwork. Right? Governance is not tested when you're looking in the rearview mirror. Governance is tested when you're looking forward. It's going to help you to make different decisions. So back to the issue of directing and controlling. How are you directing and controlling if you keep on using a narrative that is, oh my gosh, there's the compliance again. Oh my gosh, it's a risk. Everything's a risk. Oh, for the way, let's just close down the shop. You're not going to be in the race. In fact, I don't know how you got on the starting line if that's the mentality of the board who see compliance and governance in that way. Now, there's another important point on this slide. Besides being able to see your dashboard, pretty much the same in the organization as an analogy to a motor vehicle or a racing car, I want to be able to see the governance, the compliance, and the risk in real time. So that's the visibility and the demonstration of what we're seeing taking place in the organization. I want to be able to see it. I want to be able to observe it. There's a difference between seeing and observing. I want to see it all the time. I don't want to just see it 4 times a year. I want to see it all the time, Monday to Sunday. And I want that to be made available to the non-executive directors as well. Okay, so you can see where this is going. We need to understand that if you're racing against the world's top F1 drivers, everything has got to be perfect. Everything has got to be real time. It's got to be visible. And if you're not able to extract value in order to win the race, why are you on the track in the first place? All right. Again, back to the car. If that temperature of the engine is rising, I don't want to discover because my instrumentation is not working that the temperature is rising, and I've got 500 meters left to go in this 40 lap race, and 500 meters before the end, the engine blows. What's the point? All right. So connecting that to strategy is another important thing. Often you'll find that the board, because of this kind of backward type thinking, not prepared type thinking to the importance of GRC and specifically compliance, where we would use compliance, which is going to come up this now, as a competitive advantage. I want to be able to see this entire map, all right? And I want to be able to pull it into the strategy. Now, let's talk about strategy. Some of those drivers who go out, for them it's important to sit not in only pole position, but they want to be in the second pole position, right? And they'll just sit and they'll track in the wind stream, the leader. All right, that's what they do. And there are organizations that do exactly that. In your strategy, which hopefully is being revised every 6, 12, 18 months, completely revised in order to be in the game. All right. You've got to make sure that whatever you are doing from a risk point of view, from a compliance point of view, which is how you govern, how you race, if you keep that analogy in mind, you've got to make sure that all the areas of compliance, that which you choose to comply with. Now, I'm leaving that door open, Bill, for you to ask what I mean by that a little later if you want to. But to that which you choose to be compliant with, it is a conscious choice. All the areas that you're expected to comply with, is that brought into the thinking of the race? Is it brought into the thinking of the strategy? Because if it's not, your strategy is probably going to present more risks than opportunities. All right. Now, I'm not suggesting that strategies themselves are written, devoid of the board's thinking around governance, risk, and compliance. That's not what I'm suggesting. But when the pressure is up, when you're under pressure, when the shareholders are putting demands on you, the CEO may decide to change things that are not aligned with the compliance or the instrumentation that they were expected to have been compliant to or with. And that's the connection to strategy. So I've spent perhaps a little bit too much time on this particular slide, but it's important to bring the correlation between governance, the governing, the compliance, internal, external laws and other, and linking that into strategy. And of course, with that, with the strategy in mind, the operational, aspects then need to be checked as well. So you can't divorce strategy necessarily from operations. All right. Again, it's like the coin. It's the flip side of how the organization remains sustainable, profitable, and a winner organization by looking at strategy on the one side of the same coin, and on the other side, the operations in exactly the same way to the governance versus the risk.
You could
So
go
go.
back one slide, Terry.
Should I?
Um,
Did I miss it? Did I miss a
Could you?
slide?
No, I
Yeah.
asked,
Oh,
could you?
yeah.
So,
Sure. There we
so
go.
I want to give a shameless plug because one of our dear friends at CEO Zones is Jim Voss, the CEO of Tenneco. And when you talk about Formula One racing, they are the major components that Cadillac Formula One racing started with this year. It's their first season. So they're learning the risk, the value, the opportunity of being in Formula One, and what does that mean to Cadillac. But Tenneco is behind that, making sure that every transmission that's in the pits is ready to go, taught how to change. The easy thing around a pit stop would be the tires possibly and fuel. And that's not so easy. It's pretty dangerous when you watch, but that would be the more common, typical thing. But just last week, Tenneco and Cadillac together, that partnership experienced that they were actually in a position to win their first race, and literally before the last lap, something broke.
There we go.
And they didn't look at that as, oh, gee, we just failed. They looked at that as it's our first season, and these are the way we're going to make this better, stronger, faster for the next race. So anyway,
So,
just wanted to give a shameless plug to our
oh
dear
yeah,
friend Jim
no,
Voss, and his birthday
yeah,
was yesterday, so hopefully he'll
okay.
catch this. So,
You'll catch it.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's it's great that you mentioned that because I can maybe just add a few points onto that.
Mhm.
The first thing is that the people racing the F1, again back to the same analogy, the person, the racing car driver racing the F1 is absolutely dependent on the people and the pit crew, absolutely dependent, um, as they are dependent on him on the track racing and applying his strategy, when to overtake, how to overtake, what speed, etc., etc., etc. Everything is finely tuned, finely balanced. Right, so that's the first point. If something goes wrong in anywhere of those processes, anywhere, the chances are that the driver is not going to win the race. So that's the first point. The second point is the driver and the pit crew need to be able to see the governance of the entire situation for the entire event in real time. Remember that the driver has got constant communications with the pit crew. And the driver is seeing things with more modern technology, so is the pit crew as well. The pit crew can see when that engine is getting too hot. And they can tell him ease off, back off while he's in the race. So that's the next thing. You want to be able to spot where those risks are coming from. And you want to be able to isolate those risks, if you can, in near real time. Now, I'm not just referring now to an F1 scenario. I'm also referring it also to business, because that's exactly what we do, right? As a specialist governance framework organization. The next thing I want to also make a point on, every single person in that entire system, the ecosystem, if you will, of the race, or the ecosystem of the organization, every one of them are trained specialists. They don't just change a tire. They change a tire with one nut, one bolt, whatever it is, and they do it in nanoseconds almost. Not quite, but seconds, not minutes, seconds. And they get hired because of their ability to change the tire, to put the fuel in as quick and as efficient and as effective as what they do. The point being, every one of them are trained specialists. Now, I wonder if the same holds true for our compliance people in the organization. Sometimes they just arrive there by default. Oh, you look like a good guy. Why don't you go and see if you like the compliance department? Well, now you already know you're in trouble, because maybe I don't want to go there, but I don't want to lose my job. I'm actually a risk guy, but what I understand about compliance, which is different to risk, all right, is not the same. So you're not putting your A grade people into these kind of positions, which are absolutely critical, not just for the survival, but for the sustainability and the profitability of the organization. All right. So I think I've labored that far too much. Sorry. But you've got me passionate about a topic that I absolutely love. So I was on this particular slide. The point I want to make on this is that, again, governance is not dependent on a document. Governance is not your article or your memorandum of incorporation or your articles. It's not one document, your charter or your delegation. No, it's a whole number of documents. So again, if you look at a racing car driver's dashboard, you're not just seeing the temperature of the water, the oil, or the temperature of inside the cabin, outside the cabin. No, he's got a whole array of instrumentation. And the driver, together with the people in the pit crew, know exactly the meaning, the purpose of every one of those instruments. And those instruments are akin to the instruments in an organization. There are many of them. And this is probably a good part to maybe pause and to reflect on how all those instrumentation are arranged, how they balanced, and how they pulled in to that organization system. Because the way in which I pull it into one organization system and the way in which I pull into a different competing organization system could very well be different. It's kind of like the fine tuning, right? So really the point on this particular slide is, organizations and particularly boards have to understand the arrangement of these instruments, of which compliance itself is numerous instruments. Compliance is not one instrument. And we tend to say compliance, and we put it all under one umbrella. That is a fatal mistake. All right. And to boards who are not attuned to this kind of thinking, this kind of strategic way of choosing, I'm opening the door again. Yeah, I better close it and explain what I mean. The board that chooses to address a particular instrument compliance versus one that says we have to comply with all the instruments, the one's going to get inundated and probably brought into the quagmire and get stuck because they don't know which instrument actually is more or less important than the other. Let me give you an example. And I had a session similar to this point earlier this week. And I said to the director, I said, well, what's the cost of the fine? And the answer was about 500,000 Rand. I don't know what that is right now, the conversion rate, but it's not a big amount of money, by standards of a major corporate.
$45,000. Yeah.
There we go. So it's not a massive amount of money for, a triple A corporate player. So I said, okay, fine. So reputationally, what would the damage be? So no, that's much bigger. So can you see that the Rand or the dollar base is a particular figure, but when the reputational issue is when we try and quantify the reputational damage, then suddenly say, okay, well, we better be compliant.
Right.
Because reputation and its damage exceeded the actual fine of 45,000 US dollars. All right. Similar would be the case, people claiming to be compliant with a law or with codes, etc., etc. They make a claim. Now, a claim in itself doesn't give me any form of assurance. And I'll touch on a little bit on that a little later. So again, back to strategy on this particular slide. It's important that in the strategy that we are aligned on terminology in the strategy, because the terminology is all over the place. Right. So I think enough about that. So governance done well, is a commercial advantage, certainly in our viewpoint, our experiences, and that's where, if I look to the same example I've just used a minute ago, what's the cost of the fine? What's the cost of the reputational damage? Now I can start beginning to play. I use it perhaps incorrectly, but play with, do I have to comply, or should I, must I, or do I intend not to comply? It becomes a choice, but it's a calculated choice in terms of what I will comply or not comply with. Now, let me just make a very important point now. I am not suggesting or neither saying ethics versus unethical behavior. That's not what I'm saying. And some people may misconstrue being compliant with something and not being compliant with something else. All right. So there might be something in the strategy that we've agreed, the board's agreed certain aspects in the strategy. And there and then at the very last hour, before we can amend the strategy and get it ratified by the board, I may choose to change something as a CEO operationally. Yes, there's bound to be consequences, particularly if it backfires. But the fact of the matter is, I'm non-compliant. That's not illegal. That's not unethical. I'm just breaking rank. Why? Because as a CEO, I may feel that whilst we discuss something in the board which was more theoretical, suddenly I'm in the operations, I see something, I've got the power, I've got the authority to make a tweak or make a change, and I do it. That's not compliant. All right, so I think that's an important point maybe just to get across. Again, I just want to touch on another example that happened recently in South Africa. Again, no names. The same CEO I mentioned now, where profitability was down the tube, and they actually penalized the CEO. And The point I wanted to make very clear is that, and I think I've touched on it already, but pressure. I'm not suggesting, that a CEO will be unethical when changing the strategy, or no. Pressure itself changes our behavior. It's not because I choose not to be unethical. It's pressure. Even pressure like now, maybe I want to say 100 things, but I know I don't have time for 100 things. So I can only say 5 things. And pressure will cause me to link two ideas, and maybe the ideas don't come across the right way, which is why I qualified ethical and unethical as I said it. Right. So pressure is actually, I think, the main cause for a changed way of thinking, acting, or behavior. And sometimes it takes us as individuals by surprise, because at the end of the day, we're humans, right? We are expected to make mistakes. And and having said that, I want to have some kind of robust system, some kind of robust framework that at least gives me a guardrail just to catch me, if I can put it that way. All right. So for me, governance is something that, gives a director, it gives them the necessary confidence, that management, because they can see it real time, back to the instrumentation, that management is actually navigating the uncertainties, not on an afterward type basis, but on a real time basis, even with a, dare I say, a forward thinking mindset, because they're beginning to see compliance as strategic or competitive advantages rather than the kind of viewpoint that we mentioned earlier on of this presentation. Right. So and of course that increases the resilience of the board, the management, of course the entire organization. So I thought it would be important. I've actually done two kind of areas of thinking here, and this is the first part of that thinking. And I'm not gonna cue it too much, but I'd like you just to have a look at that slide, Bill, and to the viewers when they see this recording. On the one side, you've got an organization that's very compliance orientated. Okay, they are led through compliance. The other organization is led by a smart way of governing, right? A smart way of governing where I can calculate the risks, I can mitigate the risks very differently to the company on the left-hand side. Now have a look at what I've got on the left-hand side. There we're saying, we're spending, the spend rises, it creates fear around GRC, around whatever it is, but mostly GRC, which is normally and always, well, that's an oxymoron. It's normally a grudge spend, all right?
Yeah.
Then you've got fragmented documentation, again on the left-hand side, and you've got, strategy that's checked in late, all right? And strategy that perhaps is not moving, it's not dynamic. All right, so that's the one side. On the other side, you've got this other organization, and this organization, understands, the better part of governance, risk, compliance, prudent judgment in the way in which they, write their strategy, exercise their strategy, the kind of command delegation of authority they extend to their CEO to make that on the fly kind of quick change, the one that is centrally connected to governance, risk, and compliance, where the board can actually see why the CEO is making a quick change on the fly, and where the strategy of the organization is clearly being tested almost on a continual basis, Bill. It's not a strategy written once a year. All right, now think about those two organizations. On the left-hand side, the board is waiting for the results, however those results may be or be seen or interpreted or written, once a quarter, every half year, annually. That's how they see. Now notice that's after the event. That's how the left-hand side organization is working, but they're under the same pressure. On the right-hand side, it's very different, because here the collective of the board, executive, non-executive, as well as the C-suite, as well as line management, they've got a constant view of the dashboard. In other words, like the racing car. All of the people in the pitch, they can all see it together, real time, as it's happening. So the question, I guess, is to CEOs watching this particular webinar, Bill, is which organization would you want to be governing? Which one do you want to be a part of to direct and control? That for me is the critical question. And I'm not going to give the answer because I think it's actually quite obvious. All right.
Well, I'm going to answer it this way, just in case I'm wrong. But if we think about the chief financial officer position 30 years ago, it was 10 days after the end of the month, I told you what happened. If you
Yeah.
think of the CFO of financial departments now, it is predicting proactively what's happening 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 and 6 quarters ahead.
Mm.
So I
Yep.
think that is being proactive opposed to reactive.
Reactive.
And one of our viewers put that in the chat, so maybe that'll show up. So thank you, viewer.
Yeah.
You've opened another can of worms. So this week earlier, as you mentioned, you were working with some of your clients. I was reading about how Netflix board is moving towards this word transparency, which would be more around led by governance. And they literally now have authority, which I can remember being CEO. I'm not so sure I had the uh, ego or confidence that I would allow this. But any board member now is connected to their entire data set, their SharePoint, their Google Drive, whatever that might be, or their Oracle, their SAP, whatever it is. Every board member can go as deep into data as they want. And they are allowed, without asking the CEO, to talk to anyone in the organization. And Netflix was put up on this case study. And it's kind of like, in my experience, I'll give you the thought process of it's the first time you give a CEO a dashboard, and all of a sudden, 6 in the morning, he's calling people in plant 7 because, hey, how are you going to fix this, right? And you
Precisely.
get that knee-jerk reaction
Mm.
where
Mm.
what you used to see 90 days later, you're now seeing in real time. So I
100%.
know this is your livelihood, not this
Mm.
webinar, but you're working with organizations around. They can see everything at once through
Mm.
governance.
Mm.
How, and this wasn't part of our thought process, but you made me go here. As we were racing around Monte Carlo in our Formula One, and next year Cadillac's going to win that race, doggone it, Jim Boss. But in any event, uh, as you were making me think about that, we could have this knee-jerk reaction as we go from compliance to governance. And I know you've worked with lots of people, you have a platform around that.
Mm.
So
Mm.
how do you control or set up the right way to give governance its freedom, but at the same time not let a board member get too involved in the day-to-day? And
Good question. Excellent
uh,
question. So I won't go into the mechanics of it right now because time won't
right.
permit. But the fact of the matter is that we actually show the board all the strategic areas for board accountability,
Mhm.
and that's all ring fenced. But then we give them a peep, a look downstairs into all the management areas, and they know not to cross that line. But what is
Okay.
important is that the driver, if I go back to analogy, a
Mhm.
driver needs to have absolute confidence in the pit crew. Absolute confidence. He's got to know the pit crew almost by name. He's got to know what would they do. He almost is able to predict what each person by name would do and how well they do it.
Mhm.
But he doesn't literally, as a driver, go and change the tires in the car.
Right.
So, so digitized governance allows the driver to understand the pit crew by name, understand the function of the pit crew, know how the pit crew operate, but won't physically get involved in physically changing the oil, the tire, the fuel. All right. And digitized governing platforms give the whole picture to the whole team, allowing each one to have a viewpoint of the other one's function, professionalized function. So we do that very, very clearly. It's precisely because you don't want a board to become too operationalized. All right. And likewise, the guy changing the oil, the fuel, the tires, he's never ever going to be well, I shouldn't say that, but it's not likely that he would be a driver. He understands how the car works. He can switch the car and he can take the car around for a quick spin, but he'll never ever be that driver. So they know their lanes. Oh my gosh, I'm using so many metaphors here. I shouldn't be doing that. But they all know their lanes. But I think fundamental to your question, the board doesn't have the necessary time, skills, experience, and this is generalized, to go into the operational affairs. But the board needs to have full understanding so that it can practice proper, insightful oversight of the entire system. Think about it, Bill. If as a board member, if you're getting information on a reactive basis, if you're getting information that has been, dare I say, manipulated, dare I say, incomplete, it doesn't matter which permutation of this you're looking at, your decisions are going to be informed differently, and your actions are going to be different, and the consequences are going to be different, all because of the fact that you didn't get proper information, holistic information, and importantly, in real time. Right. So that's just a quick response to a very loaded question. And it's a critical question. No, it is. It's a critical question. Right. So keeping the theme of cars, and please forgive me, Bill.
No, I expected to see a Porsche, not whatever those
Well,
are. Yeah.
well, I actually thought of that, but then I thought, my gosh, I could get into trouble if I put a Porsche next to a Ferrari. But I think this does I think this does very well, and you know where my passion lies. But let's have a look at what's on the screen. And this is a real case example, by the way. And no, it's not a real case example against VW, the dark advert VW. So that's not the real case example. This is a real case example of an organization in South Africa, a massive organization in South Africa, again, nameless, where it made claims. Now, have a look on the left-hand side, all right? And just quickly scan it. And on the left-hand side, you can see that there, this particular organization is making certain claims, all right? And in this particular example, the claim is quite high, that it is X percentage, near 100% compliant with laws, rules, codes, policies, regulations, delegations, strategy, or whatever it is. Okay, that's the claim. That's the claim. Why
But
would
it's
I
also
doubt?
the home team, the way you have it laid out there. There's no one else checking them, right? There's not an outsider.
Well,
So,
well, that's the other side. So notice on the other side, the the statement, again, you can say a claim, but the statement is, well, we are 60, 70, 80% compliant, but it's significantly less than the other organization on the left hand side. And so this now starts to beg certain questions around which one do you believe has greater, credibility? Which one would you want to be a CEO of? Why? Which one would you support as a stakeholder? Which one would you want to sit on the board with? Which one would give you more comfort? Which one's more credible? All right. And that is
me.
exactly, sorry, Paul, that is exactly on the right hand side, an organization that understands the issue of compliance and using compliance to its strategic and competitive advantage, right? But it's completely measured, it's completely corroborated, it's factual, it's got the evidence. Whereas the one on the left hand side, it is merely a claim. So compliance is management's claim, and this is critical to understand, because the test of compliance does not happen in the boardroom. The test of compliance happens by and through management. All right. Assurance is what gives the claim the credibility it seeks or it wants. All right. The visibility, okay, creates the confidence. In other words, the visibility of your governance gives the confidence. It creates trust. And through that visibility, it gives you the competitive advantage. So again, to the theme of this webinar, which motor vehicle are you more likely to purchase?
Me personally, I'd go with B. Even though it's a low number, I would check out why it's a low number.
Ah, wait, Bill. What's a lower number? The compliance
67%.
percentage?
Yeah.
But let's assume, Bill, that
Yep.
that number is 100% real.
Yep.
And they know why it's at 67%, and it's been independently verified, corroborated by auditors and all the lines of defense. It's a real number. They are not, for example, using child labor. They are not using second grade, low grade steel. These safety belts actually do work, and they will protect and save your life. Now I'm going to ask you the question again. Why would we go for company B, manufacturer B?
Because I
Because
trust them. I would think they would tell me the truth. Uh,
exactly,
yeah.
it's visible, it's credible. And if you look at the company on the left-hand side, it is merely, Bill, a claim. It has not been corroborated. Now, we had an organization in South Africa, again, no names, they claimed at the time to be compliant with King 4. Well, King 4 hadn't been written yet at the time when they made the claim, didn't even exist. And then they said, we're 98% compliant to King 4. So I contacted, because it was brought to my attention, I contacted the CEO of the organization and I said, this is fascinating. Firstly, King 4 does not exist. And remember, King is only one instrument, like the Cadbury code, the NAM code. It's only one instrument in your toolbox. It's only one instrument. But anyway, how can you make a claim that you're compliant with King 4? It doesn't exist. Response, oh my gosh, Terry, that is a typo. Clearly, it's a typo. Okay, it wasn't that clear to me. It's a claim. Now that we've got past that, please explain to me what instrumentation, what method did you use to calculate 98% compliant with the instrument, compliant with the code? How did you do that? I'm curious to know. Couldn't give an answer. Now think about what the stakeholders are reading. And that went on for 2 years, by the way. 2 years. And that tells you something else.
Mm.
What are the stakeholders reading? What's the perception? What's the optics? I'm going to buy a car from company A because the optics look good. 98%. The optics look good, but it's not tested. First crash test, the safety belt breaks and you're dead. So I thought that would be a useful, quick, example because it's real and it
Yep.
happens. Now, to start ending on this, there are perhaps 5 distinct areas that I think we need to address to move away from this compliant dread kind of situation. And the first thing is in the racing car is to understand the instrumentation. It's like a mechanic. He's got all these tools in the box. He doesn't rely on one tool. He relies on all the tools in order to, remedy, fix a problem in the car. The next thing is to put those tools into a proper toolbox. You can't have your tools scattered everywhere. And that would talk to the governing framework. So you've got governance instruments, many of them legal and non-legal instruments. And then you've got a governance box, a toolbox. That's your governance framework. And the instruments reside inside the toolbox, inside the framework. Then in the framework, when you're looking at all these different elements of governance, one element is called strategy. There are many other elements. In a good, decent, robust governance framework, you're going to find between 32 and 38 major governing elements, of which the entire story of compliance is one element. Everything in compliance is just one element. Strategy is another element. Operations is another element. They're between 32 and 38 elements. So to point number 2, the strategy is reliant on the robustness of the framework. Make sense?
Mhm.
Then as you're looking at your instrumentation, the dashboard of your car, you want to be able to see if the engine is overheating, whether you've got an air pressure problem, etc., etc., etc. And you want to be able to say, I've got 500 meters to go to the winning line. Can I get to that winning line on a half flat tire? And you and I both know that's happened before, and they've won the race. The rubber's spinning out, and he knows he's just got a dash to go. And he rides over that winning line. I get goosebumps as I remember some of them. And he's riding on raw iron, steel, and there's sparks everywhere. And he gets the checkered flag because he knows that without, you know, he doesn't have to go into the pit lane. He can get across that line and still get his head in front of the second contender because he knows how to mitigate the weaknesses of the car, the weaknesses of the organization. Some of those weaknesses you can mitigate real time. Others will take a lot more work. The next area is when you look at your governance and your compliance and you understand the risk of governance and the governance risk, they're different. Okay. That is when you start bringing value into your business model, into your strategy. You change the language, you change the way in which you look at it, you change the way in which you treat it. And this all needs to be brought into your toolbox, into your framework, remembering that your framework is going to point out to you the reds, the ambers, and the greens, the numbers, the performance indicators, etc., etc., etc. And that the toolbox itself, the governing framework itself, is not static. If there's a new tool, if there's a new instrument, you better know about that instrument because maybe it'll change the wheel quicker than the ones you're using. Right. And that's kind of the whole way in which, the board wants to be looking at the governing, the directing, the controlling of the organization. You can't have directing without controlling. And yet, by the same measure, you can't have controls without directing. It's kind of the yin and the yang. Right. So yeah, so finally, Bill, and I apologize if I've gone a bit over time here, but I've often said to people, governance seems something out there, something that you can't quite touch or feel or understand. You can't taste it. Well, I argue you can, because governance is set in place by people. People are the people that put in governance. And so if you look to this thing, maybe a little bit controversial, a good board versus a poor performing board versus a agile, less agile, however you want to see it, a modern agile thinking board, we like to believe is going to make well-informed, good decisions. But even with the instrumentation and even with the toolbox, things are going to go wrong. The question is, how quickly can you fix it? That's the real question. You can't fix it by the time audit have come and told you there's a problem, or by the time there's some investigation, internal or external, of the organization. That's not when you fix, the the governance of your organization. It's too late. It's absolutely too late. But on that note, I think it's probably a good time to hand back over to you. I apologize if I've probably exceeded my time by 10 minutes or so. But it's a worthwhile discussion, maybe just to unpack a few extra, areas, that give more meaning to discussion as critical as this. Back to you, Bill. Thank you.
Well, you gave me a couple thoughts there. So thank you, Terry. But on now I've forgotten my calendar. Your next webinar date is August. Why can't I think of that all of a sudden? Is it the 19th? Yes, August.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you put that slide back up, or is that difficult?
I can. I didn't have the date on that slide, but I certainly can bring it back up.
I think it's August 19th, but for sure it'll be, if people go to CEO Zone's event page, they'll be able to see that event and register for it. But the third of 3 webinars, so one of my points would be evaluating board's real performance. I do think is in the sanctuary, one of those topics that CEOs, whether they're bold about, are you giving me value as a board, or they're thinking it with every time somebody disagrees with the CEO, which can happen multiple times in an hour meeting. If you have a good board, right? Because you're trying to challenge to get the right decision, the best decision. So I look forward to finding out how we can share with CEOs how to evaluate the board's performance. Another thought crossed my mind, and I don't. We can always cut this out of the replay if you don't like it. Joel, make sure you pay attention to Terry's answer. But it gives me a thought that the fourth webinar, if you'd be willing to do that, would be to literally give us a demonstration of your digital board governance,
Okay.
what you do for a day job. And we appreciate you donating your hour here and preparing and all of that.
Mm,
But I think some of the people that are following the breadcrumbs here are seeing why board governance needs to be digital.
mm,
And it's come to light to me because I remember when you gave me a demonstration probably over a year ago,
mm.
I would say, yeah, but I don't know we're ready for that. I
Yeah,
do think the concepts of AI has now brought digital governance
absolutely.
even further, not necessarily whether you're using AI or not, but what's AI governance. And
Mm,
it also speeds up that proactive view, kind of back to that scenario of a CFO from days gone by, told you what happened and was more like the newspaper, good or
yeah,
bad. And now the CFO has to be saying, here's the radar map of where we're going and what the temperature is going to be, and are we going to be successful long before we
yeah,
get there. So I
yeah.
think that gets back following evaluating boards' real performance.
Right.
I would open it up if you're willing that
Yeah, no, I
we'd
don't, I don't,
certainly,
yeah,
yeah,
Bill, I don't have a problem doing that.
yeah,
I'm always very sensitive of not using, your platform as a, as a promotional platform,
right.
because that's not how CEO zones and the sanctuary works. I'm very mindful of that. But I would be delighted just to, just to
Sure.
kind of give a quick overview of that. And I think in some way, the next webinar is going to touch on it. So you're talking about a fourth webinar, which would maybe then be more demonstration webinar. But the
Yeah.
third webinar is going to be me covering two angles of evaluating a board. The one would be, the board as human beings themselves. But
Hmm.
then I'm going to be coming in from the angle to say, how can you show me or demonstrate the purpose and the value that have been ascribed to you? Can you show me your individual physical value to this board?
Right.
That's a very different question. So it's not about evaluating the collegiality of the board necessarily. When I do
Right.
the third one, it's going to go way beyond the collegiality, way beyond.
Excellent.
It's why do you get picked for a board, and why specifically you? We may even talk a little bit about the board matrix, the importance of that matrix, but also about persona, the persona of the board, and then the persona of the individual. Those are different. They're not the same. So I'll probably bring that into that next webinar, the third webinar, which is up on the 19th.
Okay. And I appreciate that as a content partner, you're very cautious because we
Yeah,
do get rather cranky in the sanctuary. When CEOs or members in the sanctuary, we do not allow selling, we do not
exactly.
allow advertising. It is for that CEO to come and find out
Mm,
how to
mm,
get major decisions without the noise, all signal,
exactly.
without your board looking over your shoulder, without your direct reports listening in, and truly bring you to a better decision,
Yeah,
which is better for all the stakeholders, shareholders, and yourself.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
appreciate you being cautious, but I'm now welcoming you to do
Thank you.
that
Yeah, thank
because I
you.
think
Yeah,
it is one, it's a webinar, so we're not in the
yeah,
sanctuary, and
yeah.
two, I think we've kind of come down the trail where many CEOs or chairmen of boards are going to see the webinar and say, "Well, now what
What
do I do?
what is it?
How do I
What's
do
to
that?"
what's
Right.
that wacky South African saying?
That's right.
Real-time governance. I can look at the dashboard like I see on my car. What the hang? And
Yeah,
that changes everything, Bill. It changes everything. Behavior, appointments, removals, strategy, competitiveness. It changes everything.
I agree with you.
It's
So
exciting.
we better